Those who've played Season 1 of The Walking Dead, there's always a question as to what would have happened if certain characters were still around, even to the end of the season itself. Many times I've had the same question, what if this character was still around? So with the help of my friend Beatty, we're going to go through a few characters that unfortunately weren't around for the entirety of Season 1 and theorize what would have happened if they were somehow still here. First person that I want to go through is the homegirl Carly. For all the Carly enjoyers, we were very ashamed to witness the events that happened to her.
Oh, no! No!
The fuck's the
Lily?
problem?
No! Fuck you!
Killed someone before all.
From the events that happened in episode 1, 2, and the beginning of episode 3, we know the reason as to why Lily decided to kill Carly, not handling the emotion with everything, dishing the anger towards her by shooting her. Unfortunately, the group has to leave her on the side of the road where we see her slowly rot away in the 400 Days DLC. But what if she survived and stayed past episode 3? Now before we go any further, we first have to talk about Lily and the situation with her trying to corner out who was the cause for the bandits to come to the motor inn. If you know the story, you would know that Ben was the reason as to why the bandits came to the motor inn, because he was giving out supplies to keep them away. This forced our main group to leave in the RV. Lily, being very on edge, proceeded to ask questions to either Carly or Ben about whether it was one of them that was the reason the bandits came. Why is this important? Well, we have to theorize and explain whether or not someone would still die, and since for this what if, we of course have Carly still alive. So the question is, does Lily still shoot somebody? In my explanation of things, Lily could either kill Ben, enabling him to not be in the story, which in this decision doesn't allow Kenny to find out about what Ben did, of course no character development, as well as having Kenny potentially try to save him in the future episodes. The other choice being to where she gives the gun up and gets back into the RV. And the third option being where she ends up being left to fend for herself. Two of these choices we can eliminate. The path if Lily were to be left behind would still allow Carly to be alive, and the path where Lily gets back into the RV, I believe she would still leave with the RV to take for herself. Which leaves us with Ben dying, Carly living, and Lily not being in the group anymore. Or Ben living, Carly living, and Lily gone. With Carly being in the group still, in terms of episode 3, there's not much in terms of her doing much since the majority of the episode is witnessing the lowest point that the group has been in the story so far. So knowing Carly's character and seeing that she does have a liking to Lee and Clementine, I have no doubt that she would show emotional support towards both of them, supporting the decisions that Lee has to make and making sure that Clementine is okay, especially with dealing with the stranger on the radio. Going into episode 4, it's very interesting because quite a few things could change. Starting off in episode 4, we see the team arrive in Savannah after taking the train to get there. As the team walks down the street bells end up ringing from a person navigating on the roofs. Walkers show up, and it's so the team run away in hopes to find someplace to hide. Now the events that take place where the team are fighting off the walkers, the scene where Ben ends up leaving Clementine with a small group of them. Since Carly is in the group, the odds of Chuck being alive is very possible. Maybe even going ahead to be in the group once they find the mansion and perhaps onwards. The only thing with this being a possibility is that it would be hard to judge what exactly Chuck would do, since in the canon story, Chuck dies trying to save Clementine. It's really up for interpretation as to what Chuck would do if he were to live. As far as Carly being present when they get to the house, her deciding to go with Lee and Kenny to the river to find a boat is very plausible, since she's pretty keen on having Lee's back like she did in episode 2. Everything would play out more so the same, where Kenny, Clementine, Molly, and Carly would escape the walkers, except for Lee, who he goes down in the sewer meeting Vernon, leading him back to the mansion. With her going to Crawford, I believe she would be perfectly fine in getting through there. Now, with Carly being with the group afterwards is what really changes in the story. After the group successfully break in and out of Crawford, some get their bearings and some of the team leave for their own endeavors. One scene, however, that I want to speak about is where Lee tries to comfort Clementine after telling her that odds are she wouldn't be able to see her parents again, and that heading onwards on the boat is the next move. Lee ends up taking a nap, and upon waking up, he notices that Clementine is gone. Lee, while searching for her, ends up outside the gates of the house and notices Clementine's hat, in which he goes on to pick it up. Lee then gets snuck on by a walker and ends up getting bit, which, with the noise that he made, the group come outside to see what's going on. Which the choice of hiding the bite or revealing it is in effect. Since this is all speculation and theorizing, it's hard to say whether or not Clementine would be gone with the stranger, since the next time that we see her is in the Marsh house. With Carly being there, it begs the question if she would keep tabs on Clementine, similar to the way that she was much aware of the St. John brothers walking towards the motor inn in episode 2. So using that as a reference, seeing that the stranger was outside the mansion at one point, I would think Carly would have an eye on Clementine enough to be able to stop her from getting kidnapped. With this being a possible timeline in which Lee doesn't get bit, the boat doesn't get stolen by Vernon's group, and Clementine is not captured, this leaves us with the whole group essentially having to haul the boat to the riverside to leave Savannah. From here on out, it's up for interpretation. So with the timeline of where Lee still gets bit, Clementine is captured, and the portion of the group go out looking for Vernon, if the choice were to leave Carly behind to fend for the boat, it's hard for me to doubt that she wouldn't be capable of handling herself against all of Vernon's group. At least slow them down for that matter. With that possibility, our team would still have the boat. But even then, with Kenny being missing, whether by Ben or Chris's mishaps, it's debatable whether or not they would go back to the boat after Lee's death. And even if the boat gets taken still, I believe that Carly would either be with Krista and Omid, or safe by herself to where Clementine can have the options to go with Krista, Omid, and Carly, or perhaps trying to find Carly by herself. In hindsight, besides the canon death for Carly, it's hard for me to see Carly die for the rest of the season. The only other way I could see Carly end up dying would be if she were to go out of her way to save or help Lee in some way. For example, going after Lee when he went to the Marsh house. Other than that, it's hard to picture her going out. I do believe though that for Carly to still be alive after episode 3, she would be the most supportive person towards not just Lee and Clementine but everyone in the group. With that, she definitely would have been a great caretaker for Clementine after season 1.
Ben was without a doubt the most criticised character in the first season of The Walking Dead, with a fair amount of people online suggesting his unfortunate fate was deserved after failing to prove himself as a valuable asset and making mistake after mistake after mistake. Ben was a teenager who was obviously terrified of the apocalypse, not exactly made for surviving in such a harsh world.
What would you have done with Lily?
I don't know. Left her? I've never seen anybody kill someone like that before.
But I truly believe that Ben is one of those characters whose arc many players overlook, whilst his role in the narrative is far more significant than he's given credit for. It's so easy to dismiss Ben as a massive liability. Don't get me wrong, he absolutely was, but if it wasn't for the mounted pressure piled onto his shoulders by people who treated him as if he wasn't literally a child, and with a little more time and some actual guidance, would he have survived? Ben's journey is one of many missed opportunities. Had he survived longer, we might have seen a very different side of Ben, one that could have changed the course of events for the rest of the game. Ben is introduced to us in episode 2 of the first season of The Walking Dead, when Mark and Lee come across him, his teacher, and Travis. In most circumstances, Travis gets absolutely mauled, leaving Ben to arrive at the motel with a legless teacher. He inevitably turns after dying from blood loss, and Ben ends up remaining in the rest of the group, living in the motel and explaining to them all about how everybody is infected with the virus, and that no matter how you die, you will always become a zombie. The rest of Ben's story in the game is far from heroic, and he very quickly becomes a punching bag of the group. His failure to come clean about the bandits, coupled with his constant fear and indecisiveness, makes him a target for mostly Kenny, but in general the group's frustration. We all know he was indirectly the reason behind the death of Duck and Catcher, as well as Doug or Carly, and arguably other people such as Chuck or Bree. Ben is scared, unreliable, and simply untrustworthy, but the main thing is, he was sorry. Like, really sorry. Ben's errors were purely from a lack of experience rather than malice, and as soon as he gave us the best quote in the season,
I am so sorry about Katja and Duck. I am. And I know I fucked up. But stop pushing me around and stop wishing I was dead. No! You know how they died. You said goodbye. I never got to see my family, my parents, my little sister. Do you get that? Your family is gone, but at least you had them to lose. I never made it home. They could be alive or dead or walkers or worse, and I don't know. So give me a fucking break!
Ben showed that he was ready to stop letting himself and everyone else down, instead desperate to find some sort of redemption. We knew how tired he was of keeping the group behind, during the scene where he begged Lee to just let him die in the bell tower in Crawford. But had Ben been given more opportunities to learn and to be mentored, his story could have unfolded much differently, and he could have played such a vital role in season 2 had he survived. After Omid's shocking death and Krista splitting away from Clementine in the woods, Clem was left to fend for herself entirely, and finding herself in the safety of a new group was far from easy. After receiving a gnarly dog bite with the cabin group all seemingly incapable of distinguishing it from a zombie bite, I mean, they're clearly different, we were introduced to the main theme that season 2 followed, The group for the entirety of Season 2 was completely fraught with unstable emotions and distrust. People were divided and at each other's throats for the whole game. The group was constantly at risk of falling apart and were all a danger to each other, with Clementine not being a strong enough presence to diffuse heated situations like Lee was able to. The entire group in fact just seemed far less experienced than the group in Season 1, hence why Clem effectively took charge of the adults. But Ben obviously had a lot of experience in emotional environments. Even if his survival skills didn't necessarily improve over the 16-month gap between Season 1 and 2, his emotional understanding would have proved so unbelievably useful for that train wreck of a group. Ben understood what it felt like to make mistakes and to be rejected by a group, and this could have given him the emotional intelligence needed to mediate conflicts, and I don't doubt that his survival skills would have absolutely improved over the time jump. Ben hated the pressure that was put onto him. Every single adult in that group in Savannah treated Ben as if he was an adult, giving him important tasks which were just simply too much for him. With less eyes on him and his desire to redeem himself, I'm sure he would have learnt how to truly survive in the zombie world. After Kenny began empathizing with Ben in the final episodes of Season 1, the two started to form a stronger relationship. Kenny and Ben both began to understand each other, sharing more in common than they'd originally thought. Let's rewind to that moment where Ben fatally found himself impaled on the fallen railing in the alleyway. We're left with uncertainty as we hear a single gunshot after Kenny ran down to do his best to help Ben. We know now that the gunshot was from Kenny putting down Ben to prevent him from falling to his terrible fear of being eaten alive. I'd like to imagine that if Kenny was somehow able to drag Ben off that spike and keep him alive after escaping the horde together, the two would have actually been an unbeatable pair. After living with one another for that amount of time, still coming across Walter, Matthew and Sarita, Ben would have again proved to be the perfect glue to hold the group together. We all know that Kenny was completely unstable in Season 2, clearly struggling to hold it together from the moment we saw him again at the cabin, where he still inadvertently thought about his dead son.
Pass me that can, Duck.
Following the death of Sarita, Kenny was a loose cannon, regularly having rash or violent outbursts to other characters. But with Ben's understanding and their tightened bond forming over the near year and a half, I believe that Ben would have been the calm in the vicious Kenny storm that led to the destructive ending of the second season. Finally, I couldn't talk about how Season 2 may have been affected without mentioning how Ben's survival may have led to a change in Carver's dictatorship. Now, I'm not in any way saying that Ben would have put up a fight against Carver. You'd have more chance in catching a bowling ball with a Ritz cracker than Ben even making a scratch on Carver. But with Ben's utmost determination to earn redemption not only for himself but for Kenny, Katja, Duck, Carly or Doug, he would have certainly played an active role in standing up for the group against Carver. Now, everyone was scared of him, and Ben absolutely would have been too, but just like Kenny, he would have been more afraid in letting Carver continue to rule tyrannously when he knows that he could have made a change, encouraging the fight back for freedom.